Hey, it's Matt from Hidden Machine, here to talk about Alan Wake 2. This game was first announced all the way back in December of 2021, and aside from a teaser trailer and a couple pieces of concept art, there really hasn't been much news from Remedy about this game. So, in an attempt to fill the void, I'm here to share some of my Alan Wake 2 predictions. Now, we already know that this is going to be a third-person survival horror game, so most of this video is going to focus on the narrative and story elements and where I think the characters might be at in the next game. Obviously, I can only speculate about Alan Wake 2, and this video is just for fun. But I am trying to make some educated guesses here. We have over 60 Remedy-related videos here on the Hidden Machine channel, so we've spent a lot of time breaking down the games and the Remedy-connected universe. We're not the authority on the topic, but we do know a thing or two. As a quick warning, this video will contain spoilers for Alan Wake, Alan Wake's American Nightmare, and Control. So if you haven't played those games yet, or you just haven't caught up on the story, I'd suggest that you go do that and then come back here. For everyone else that's still with us, let's get into my predictions for Alan Wake 2. In the first game, Alan was being trailed by a former FBI agent named Robert Nightingale. Nightingale believed that Alan was responsible for the disappearance and presumed death of his partner, Agent Finn. Nightingale found a number of Alan's manuscript pages and was basically under the assumption that Alan was somehow behind the Dark Presence. Nightingale arrested Alan Wake, but was taken by the Dark Presence shortly after. At the end of the first game, we can see Nightingale ominously peeking through a boarded-up window. For me, this opens up a lot of possibilities, one of them being that Nightingale might return in Alan Wake 2 as some sort of minor antagonist. I can't really see him being the final boss of the game, but we do know from the teaser trailer for Alan Wake 2 that we'll be returning to Bright Falls, and I would assume that Nightingale is there in Bright Falls waiting to confront Alan Wake. Secondly, the FBI is likely aware that Nightingale disappeared in Bright Falls. Before the events of the first game, Nightingale was fired by the FBI, and when he was interacting with the local law enforcement in Bright Falls, Nightingale falsely presented himself as an FBI agent, and he actually endangered innocent civilians when he was drunkenly firing his gun at Alan Wake, which is the type of behavior that would definitely put you on the radar of the FBI. In Control, we learned that there is an FBI agent named Alex Casey, who is requesting copies of all the FBC files on Alan Wake. Remedy games often have narrative elements that will mimic or echo their previous works. Considering that, I think it's very likely that we could see Alex Casey taking on a role in Alan Wake 2 that is very similar to the role of Robert Nightingale from the first game, that being an FBI agent who is on the trail of Alan Wake. This theme is suggested in the Alan Wake 2 concept video that can be found in the opening section of Quantum Break. That video was made a long time ago, and it's been stated that it was purely a concept video and not any sort of official trailer. So we have no idea how much of it still resembles the story of Alan Wake 2. But with FBI agent Alex Casey being introduced in Control, there's a good chance that a lot of these ideas will still make it into the game. In that concept video, Alex Casey is murdered, presumably by Alan Wake, or by an Alan Wake doppelganger, who is likely Mr. Scratch. Alex Casey's partner, Saga Anderson, investigates his disappearance. This is a direct echo of the situation between Alan Wake and Agent Nightingale, where Nightingale was pursuing Alan Wake because he thought that he was responsible for the death of his partner. And like I said, these sorts of repeating or echoing scenarios between games are a huge part of Remedy's storytelling. Also, just in case you're unfamiliar, Alex Casey is the name of the lead character in a series of crime novels written in-game by Alan Wake. The character of Alex Casey is a direct echo of Max Payne. Both characters share the same voice actor, they use the same dual Berettas, and the cover art for the Alex Casey books look just like the cover art for Max Payne 2. When Alex Casey, the FBI agent, was mentioned in Control, they noted that it was very peculiar that the person investigating the Alan Wake case shared a name with the main character of Alan Wake's most famous books. I also want to put it out there that you might actually play as Alex Casey, Saga Anderson, or some other character at some point in Alan Wake 2. Early on in development of the first Alan Wake game, there actually were sections where you played as other characters, including Agent Nightingale. Playing as multiple characters was also something that was originally planned to be included in Quantum Break, but that idea was eventually abbreviated into the junction points where you control Paul Serene. Remedy first implemented this mechanic back in Max Payne 2, having players switch between Max Payne and Mona Sachs. Since then, it seems like they've explored working that mechanic into most of their games, but for whatever reasons, it's never really happened again. Seeing as how it's likely that we'll have an FBI agent investigating Alan Wake, it'd be a perfect opportunity for players to take on another character, and possibly even face off against Alan Wake, or Mr. Scratch. The ending of Alan Wake shows that, for the most part, things have returned to normal in Bright Falls. We see many characters from throughout the game celebrating Deer Week together. It's worth noting that all of the characters who fell victim to the Dark Presence throughout the game are missing from this scene, with two exceptions. Carl Stuckey, Rusty the Park Ranger, Dr. Emil Hartman, Birch, and Ben Mott are all absent. We learn through the Alan Wake comics that Hartman escaped the Dark Presence, but Ben Mott, the kidnapper from the first game, wound up becoming one of the Taken. It's unclear what ultimately happened to those other characters that I just mentioned, but we can see in this cutscene that Rose Marigold, who had previously been put under a sort of spell by Barbara Jagger, is now holding a lantern, and effectively becoming an echo of Cynthia Weaver, who the game referred to as the Lady of the Light. The degree to which Rose was affected by Barbara Jagger and the Dark Presence isn't made entirely clear in the game, but I think it's possible that she emerged from that situation with a greater understanding of the Dark Presence, and now she's taken up the lantern to ward it off, very similar to the way that Cynthia Weaver used light to fend off the Dark Presence. If Rose does return in Alan Wake 2, I wouldn't at all be surprised to see her role become a direct echo of the role that Cynthia Weaver played in the first game. The concept of departure, initiation, and return is a major theme of Alan Wake. This is a reference to the hero's journey, and that's a topic that I discuss a lot more in depth in my video called Exploring the Remedy Connected Universe. Essentially, it seems that in order to return from the Dark Place, Alan must first go through the previous two steps. Alan successfully completed the departure phase in the first game, which was represented by the manuscript that he was writing in that game, which was named Departure. At the end of the DLC episodes for the first Alan Wake game, we see that he started writing a new manuscript, this time called Return. It seems like Alan has spent the last 13 years in the Dark Place, trying to successfully write his return, and make it a reality. However, without first going through the initiation phase, it'll never work. The rules that govern a story becoming reality were explained a lot more in depth in Alan Wake's American Nightmare, which Sam Lake recently confirmed is considered canon by Remedy. We'll be discussing that game a lot more throughout the rest of this video. In the Alan Wake 2 teaser trailer, we can see a neon sign that reads Initiation. To me, this is a pretty blunt way of saying that Alan Wake 2 represents the initiation phase of the hero's journey. But if that is the case, Alan is still going to have to go through the return phase. And in the hero's journey, the return phase isn't something that just happens instantly after the initiation phase. Each phase has a few steps to it that the hero must complete. If I'm right about all of this, then I would predict that Alan Wake's return would happen either in a third Alan Wake game or in a DLC episode for Alan Wake 2, We recently learned from the 2022 year-end report for Remedy investors that Remedy plans to service all of their new games with between 1 and 3 episodes of DLC. So either way, whether or not we're getting a third game or not, we know that the main campaign in Alan Wake 2 is not going to be the end of Alan's story. Alan Wake's American Nightmare came out 2 years after Alan Wake. And in the Remedy Connected Universe and its timeline, it takes place 2 years after the events of that first game and its 2 DLC episodes. The game represents one of Alan's many unsuccessful attempts to escape from the dark place, and as such, it really doesn't progress Alan's story very much. However, if you pay attention to the narration and manuscript pages in the game, American Nightmare goes into great detail concerning how the dark place works and how Alan is able to affect reality with his powers.
To change reality, you nudge it into the right direction. Your version of it is there, waiting. It wants to come true. All you need to do is help it achieve its potential. The devil is in the details. You change the details of the scene to match those on the page. If you get the details right, if you achieve that critical mass, the shift will come, and the rest of your new reality overrides the existing paradigm. The lie, no matter how outrageous, is now the truth.
Alan can't just leave the dark place, but he can use dream logic to exit the dark place and enter the reality that he's constructing in his stories. Alan states that there are multiple places where reality and the dark place or these other dimensions brush right up against one another. One of those places is Cauldron Lake, and I suspect that another one of those places is the Ocean View Motel. In the Alan Wake 2 teaser trailer, we can see a sign for the Ocean View Motel. So I predict that Alan will be visiting the Ocean View Motel. But that part of the trailer also looks like it takes place in New York City. So I also predict that Alan will be visiting a sort of dark place, twisted version of New York City that's probably a bit more in line with the Noir York City from the Max Payne games. I'll go on to predict that Alan Wake 2 is probably going to feature a lot of references, direct references, to Max Payne 1 and 2, laying the groundwork for the upcoming Max Payne 1 and 2 remakes being developed by Remedy and Rockstar. Well, Rockstar's parent company, Take-Two, does still own the rights to the Max Payne character. Remedy has included direct references to the games and the characters ever since they first sold the property to Take-Two back in 2002. With Remedy and Rockstar actually working together on this remake, I don't see why the references wouldn't become even more blatant and direct. And, as we saw in Crossfire X, there's potential for Max Payne to be officially connected to the greater Remedy Connected Universe. If that's the case, then I think Alan Wake 2 could be the perfect place to start further blurring the lines between Alan Wake, Alex Casey, and Max Payne. Alan Wake's American Nightmare focuses heavily on film. In the game, Alice Wake, who is Alan's wife, is debuting her first film at a local art festival. Now, she's normally a still photographer, but she was convinced by a friend to submit a film to this festival. Alan's battle against the game's antagonist, Mr. Scratch, revolves around a drive-in movie theater. The game also shows movie posters for an Alex Casey film and a film called Tom the Poet. There's a similar Tom the Poet poster in Alan Wake, and in Alan Wake Remastered, the poster was redesigned to make it even more blatant that this is a poster for a movie. We know Thomas Zane from Alan Wake to be a poet, wearing an old-timey diving suit. However, in Control, it's revealed that Thomas Zane is actually a filmmaker. The teaser trailer for Alan Wake 2 features a neon sign that reads Cinema. While I can't say exactly how that's all going to play out, I really suspect that film and movies are going to be a prominent theme of Alan Wake 2, likely building on the themes established in Alan Wake's American Nightmare. Now, I've talked a lot about American Nightmare already, but there's a few more threads established in that game that I'd like to bring up here. Firstly, Mr. Scratch. He was introduced toward the end of Alan Wake, and he played the role of the main antagonist in American Nightmare. That game explains that Scratch is the manifestation of all the negative stories and thoughts surrounding Alan Wake, and that he's become a serial killer. Alan goes on to explain that while Scratch is a formidable nemesis, he actually serves a higher power that Scratch hopes to unleash into reality. Mr. Scratch isn't mentioned by name in Control, but we do find record of an interview that the FBC conducted with Alice Wake, and she mentioned that someone who looked just like Alan had been showing up at her home, and she even managed to capture a photo of him. While the Mr. Scratch we saw in American Nightmare was very suave, I predict that he'll return in Alan Wake 2 as a much more feral and violent version of himself. I also think it's entirely possible that Alan could be unsuccessful in defeating Mr. Scratch, and whatever entity it is that he serves could make its way into reality, which would be just the sort of thing that could lead directly into another crossover event with Jesse Faden and the FBC. Both Alan Wake and Control talk a lot about entities from other dimensions, but both games leave a lot of the details intentionally vague. I think that there's great potential for us to learn more about those other dimensions and the entities within them throughout the next few releases from Remedy. American Nightmare also gave us an update on Barry Wheeler and the Old Gods of Asgard. He expressed interest in the band in the first game, and in American Nightmare, we found out that he became their manager and also produced a newly recorded single for the band. In Control, we learned that Barry's run with the Old Gods didn't last too long, and that the Anderson brothers wound up in a retirement home that Barry constructed using some of the money he made on the band's final tour. The music of the Old Gods of Asgard is written and performed by the real-world band Poets of the Fall, who have been featured in the majority of Remedy's games in one way or another. The Old Gods are a crucial part of Alan Wake, and they wound up being a crucial part of Control as well. Seeing as how the band has now retired, I'm not sure that we'll see them return in Alan Wake 2, but I do predict that the game will feature some new music from Poets of the Fall, whether it's through Alan finding a previously recorded Old Gods song, or maybe Poets of the Fall themselves will actually wind up in the game. As for Barry Wheeler, who was Alan's best friend and literary agent, I do expect him to return, but I also expect him to have a much more minor role in the game than he did in the first Alan Wake game. I could be wrong about that, but seeing as this is going to be a full-on survival horror game, I think they're going to keep Barry's comedic relief tone to a minimum. Speaking of returning characters, I think that Sheriff Sarah Breaker could have a prominent role in Alan Wake 2. Whether that's going to be through direct interaction with Alan, or maybe something told through in-game text and lore collectibles. We know from the Alan Wake comics and Alan Wake Remastered that Sheriff Breaker's father, Frank Breaker, is a retired FBC agent. Sarah is vaguely aware of this, but as far as we know, she doesn't fully understand what the FBC is or what her father did there. I would assume that she eventually asked him about it, and considering her experiences with Alan Wake and the Bright Falls AWE, it seems like she'd be a prime candidate for the position of an FBC field agent. The end of the AWE DLC for Control features a brief cutscene where we see a sticky note that says Cult of the Tree. The note contains a symbol, which we can also see in the Alan Wake 2 teaser trailer and some of the Alan Wake 2 concept art. The Foundation DLC suggests that the oldest house itself may have been a tree at one point in time, that eventually took on the form of a building so that it could blend into its surroundings. I think that the Cult of the Tree is likely to be a major force in the Remedy Connected universe, and it might be a major part of Alan Wake 2. While we really know almost nothing about it, I like to theorize that the Cult of the Tree could be comprised of former FBC members who were loyal to former director Theodore Ashe Sr. Director Ash is described as having a great respect for the unknown, and his way of looking at and dealing with paranatural entities and situations that the FBC would face was very different from how his successors would handle things. The FBC became less esoteric and started to look at the paranatural in a much more clinical and sometimes hostile way, which was in stark contrast to the awe and reverence practiced by Director Ash. I think it's totally possible that some members of the FBC didn't like how things were going, so they broke off and formed their own group, possibly the Cult of the Tree, which would somehow still be tied to the oldest house and its powers. We'll have to see how this all shakes out over time, but it's one of the Remedy mysteries that I'm most excited to learn more about once we eventually get Alan Wake 2. So that's the bulk of my predictions for the game. I do have a few other loose ideas. I predict that we'll be spending time in Watery, and we may see Ahti from Control while we're there. Watery is another small town near Bright Falls, and in Alan Wake Remastered, we can find a poster advertising the opening of an attraction called Coffee World. It's hard to make out, but it seems like this poster is also featured in the Alan Wake 2 teaser trailer. I think it's very likely that we'll be exploring Coffee World in Alan Wake 2, and it could have vibes very similar to the Lakeside Amusement Park from Silent Hill. I know I'm kind of reaching with that one, but I've seen other people post about those flyers online and they came to similar conclusions, so we'll see. Anyway, I could go on a lot longer, but I'm gonna stop there. I've been excited about the possibility of Alan Wake 2 for quite a while, and now that it's almost here, I'm constantly thinking about scenarios that might occur in the game. My gut tells me that we'll see a trailer in June at Summer Game Fest, which will be followed by 4 to 6 months of heavy promotion, with a release date in either late October or December of 2023. The game was first announced at the Game Awards in 2021, which is hosted and organized by Jeff Keighley, and so with the Summer Game Fest also being a Jeff Keighley event, it makes sense for Remedy to work with him again to unleash more news about Alan Wake 2. Those are some of my thoughts and predictions on the game, but of course, as always, I'd love to hear what you have to say about the game. What predictions do you have? Do you want to critique or build on anything I presented? Please meet me down in the comments or join the Discord channel if you want to chat further. And if you really want to support the channel, we've got memberships and a Patreon. Please subscribe for more if you like it. There's a lot more Alan Wake and Remedy related content here on Hidden Machine. And until next time, thanks for hanging out. See ya.